Hi, my name is Lisa Pearl from the University of California, Irvine. That's me. I run the Computational Language Laboratory, and I'm a professor in the Department of Language Science. This is a talk I'm planning to give to the Linguistic Student Association at CSU Fullerton on April the 26th, 2024, and it's called Computational Cognitive Modeling: How to Investigate Child Language Acquisition Using Math. And let's talk first about child language acquisition. So, child language acquisition, one way to think about it is as the extraction of language information by young children like these. And one question is, okay, what kind of language information exactly are we talking about? And so here are just some examples, some of the many examples that are out there of sort of the target language information that you might be trying to extract from your surrounding language being spoken when you are a young child. So, for example, you might be interested in learning how to identify words influence speech, which is sometimes called speech segmentation. So the actual physical signal, say in a spoken language, is this auditory wave that's hitting your ear in a spoken language. And your mind learns how to convert that signal into some sort of useful chunk, some sort of useful representation that we might then perceive, if this is English, as the words, "what a pretty kitty." But again, it's just this mishmash of auditory information that your mind converts into something that we recognize and segment into individual words. And that's speech segmentation. That's one kind of thing you might want to do. You learn how to pronounce words. We call this phonology, right? So in English, this is a kitty with emphasis on the first syllable, and not kitty with emphasis on the second syllable, right? Like that's weird. We know it's pronounced this way. That's part of your knowledge of phonology. You might also need to learn that certain words behave like other words. So what a pretty penguin, what a pretty kitty, what a pretty owl. These turn out to be the same kinds of things which we might think of technically as nouns that are countable. And we've put them into the same category. It's a syntactic category, in fact, of noun. You might need to learn how to do that. You also need to learn how to interpret words in context using your knowledge of syntax, language structure, your knowledge of semantics, what words can mean. So here's an example. Oh, look, a kitty! He's such a pretty kitty. What does he refer to? Well, most likely, this kitty that we already introduced doesn't have to be, but most likely your syntax and semantics will kind of zero in on that as the most likely interpretation for this pronoun he. And here's a continuation of this conversation. Look, there's another one. Oh, another what? Well, maybe it's another pretty kitty. Maybe it's just another kitty, but again, given your knowledge of syntax and semantics, it's likely not another wombat, given this linguistic context, right? So you're converging on how to interpret these pronouns, these sorts of words, in the context in which they occur. You also need to learn how to put words together to ask questions using your knowledge of syntax. So let's consider this kitty. This kitty was bought as a present for someone, and Lily thinks this kitty is pretty, and we might want to ask about this situation. Who does Lily think the kitty for is pretty? Except we can't. Hopefully you're making that same frowny face right here. Like, this is not a good way to ask this. We sort of get what we would like to ask, but we can't ask it this way, right? And you know that. You learn that you can't put words together this way. You have to put them together a different way. We'll actually talk more about this later. But just as another example, again, of some target information you might need to learn is how to identify the right interpretation in context using your knowledge of what's called pragmatics. So, hey, consider this. I think I saw all the kitties on the stairs. And then someone says, no. Every kitty didn't sit on the stairs. How do we interpret this? Every kitty didn't sit on the stairs. It turns out there are actually two possible interpretations in English. And one of them is that no kitties sat on the stairs. The other one is that not all the kitties sat on the stairs, right? And so given this context, I think I saw the kitties on their stairs. There's an expectation that they were all on the stairs, and someone says, no, every kitty didn't. So that's one piece of information. Another piece of information is just your world knowledge looking around, and you say, hey, some kitties are on the stairs, some kitties are not, and we like to say things that are true in conversation. So maybe if you're thinking about how to interpret this, given these two pieces of information, you end up thinking, oh, this means not all the kitties sat on the stairs, right? You're using this knowledge about the world, knowledge about the context to help you figure out which of these two possibilities is what the speaker probably meant. That's your knowledge of pragmatics. And this is just, again, some of the target knowledge for children's acquisition. There's a bunch more out there, right? And so that's one part of sort of child language acquisition. What are you learning to do? And another really important question is, okay, how does this magical acquisition process occur, right? And so let's talk a little bit about that. Children are actually amazing at learning language, like totally amazing. And in fact, much of the linguistic system and all these different things I was just telling you about, speech segmentation, phonology, categorization, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, much of it is already known by age 4, right? Which is actually not that old. And so another kind of fun fact is children basically seem to figure language out mostly without explicit instruction about a lot of the stuff we just talked about. Some of it you can instruct them about, most of it you can try and they don't listen. So they're mostly kind of doing it on their own, and that is pretty magical. What they're doing is extracting patterns, they're making generalizations from their surrounding data just by hearing mostly examples of what's allowed in the language. That is what other speakers use when speaking to each other, right? That's what they're using. And this is pretty magical. But how does it work, right? That's the question. And so I primarily use quantitative methods like computational cognitive modeling to try to figure this how question out. And so what is computational cognitive modeling? Computational cognitive modeling lets us explore theoretical ideas precisely and evaluate how well any particular theory, that is a particular idea, can explain, in this case, empirical data on children's language acquisition. So we observed something going on in kids out there in the world, and we're trying to explain how did that happen. We have some theory, we use a computational cognitive model to implement that theory and try to see if it can explain what we see out there in the world. Now, math is at the heart of this tool, right? And one main part of this process is counting things. And sometimes we count a lot of things, right? Fine. The other kind of important part is principled reasoning based on those counts. And so one example of a type of principled reasoning process that we think humans do, and children do, in fact, during language acquisition is something called Bayesian inference. It involves trying to decide how much you like a particular generalization on the basis of the data. You consider different pieces of information, but it is a very principled way to reason about the counts of things you might have observed in your data and your feelings or your biases about whatever the generalization was. It's a principled way to combine those. So, okay, we have those two pieces, but what do we count and reason over? How do we connect that information to the actual language acquisition process that we're interested in? And it's like this. We typically use computational cognitive modeling to encode a child's acquisition process very precisely, right? Just as a reminder. And in particular, we often think the child is learning by counting different parts of her input and reasoning over those counts in a sensible way. So our modeled learner is going to count those same things and learn about language by doing principled reasoning over those counts, right? Same idea. And so now what I want to transition into is how this process of computational cognitive modeling works for a type of syntactic knowledge known as syntactic IELTS.